are ready to get started. So Christine, Adrienne, Marlin, and Jason, thanks so much for joining the panel today. When you're ready, I'd love for you to introduce yourself, talk a little bit about where you work, what you do, and we go from there.
Sounds good. I'm happy to start. So my name is Marlin. I work at a company called AIGA, and I'm a user researcher there. I'm actually the only researcher in the company. What AIGA does is we power search for insight search. So not like Google search, but when you go to various websites and you're searching for a product or you're searching for different items, that kind of search we power for a lot of various companies. And research is a pretty new thing for the company. And we have a couple of UX designers and visual designers and a couple other people on our team. But yeah, my job is kind of in twofold. It's to figure out what exactly do people search for and what does that mean, but also to figure out like how do we build the best experience for the customer, and we have a dashboard for them. And then the other piece of it is just the search experience for the end user as a whole. Do you want me to give a background of how I got into UX right now too, or save that for later?
Yeah, let's save that for later.
Sounds good.
Okay, I'll go next. So I'm Adrienne Guillory, lead user researcher at AT&T here in Dallas. I am part of a new initiative, relatively new initiative, to reintroduce to some, introduce to others the concept of human-centered design, specifically design thinking. So I work on a small team of superheroes. We go in, we work with the team for 6-week engagement, do user research, and then validation studies afterwards. Let's see what else. I've been in user research now, I think about 12 years, something like that. But that's me.
Very well, I can jump in and go next. I'm Jason Buhle.
Okay.
I'm a UX strategy manager here at AnswerLab. AnswerLab is the largest independent company that is exclusively focused on user research. So we don't do any market research or UX design, just UX research. And we support tons of large companies. And my role, I specifically focus on a few of our biggest clients and help them get set up with research programs that are then executed by our research teams.
Well, I'm Christine. I'm a product designer at Instacart. Right now we have about 12 designers, and each designer kind of owns their own functional team. So I'm working on the shopper side. There's two sides of Instacart. So there's a consumer app and there's the shopper app. And I'm primarily helping our shoppers pick up shifts and get paid what they need to get paid.
That's awesome. Thank you, guys. So I guess, yes, let's get started with how you started in the field. And maybe if you want to talk a little bit about your educational background and how that might have helped or maybe not, like your decision and how, you learned about UX and how maybe that helps with what you do these days.
I guess so I have a chemistry background, and that's what I graduated with. I knew I didn't want to go into that field after graduation, and I dabbled around retail marketing because I really liked fashion and beauty. So I was there for a year, and I learned about UX, meeting with other people in the Bay Area. There's a lot of UX designers. And so as I was meeting up with them and figuring out what I wanted to do next, because marketing didn't really fulfill the creative juices that I want in my day-to-day job. And so as I was grabbing coffee, I thought UX was a good transition into design, where I don't really need graphic design skills or visual skills, but it's a lot about problem solving. And I felt like that overlapped a lot with why I was initially interested in chemistry, was that problem solving aspect. And so gradually I transitioned I transitioned into UX primarily through a boot camp, but I wouldn't say the boot camp itself was what made me get the job. It was a lot of just networking, also learning on the spot, and just reading a lot of books on UX as well. And I feel like just doing design will help you become a better designer. So yeah, that's how I got into UX.
Well, we can do reverse order, I guess, and I can go next. So my background is in experimental psychology and cognitive neuroscience. I spent about a decade doing that kind of academic research, completed a PhD at Columbia. So for folks who don't know, with that kind of work, the focus is really on better understanding how people think and make decisions using computerized tasks, and in my case, brain imaging. So I was really interested in why people do the things they do, but in a slightly different context. And then towards the end of my time working on my PhD, I started doing some consulting for a couple different ed tech companies in New York City, and became really interested in industry, as we call it in academia. So actually, after I finished my PhD, I continued doing some consulting, and I ended up joining an ed tech startup, and eventually, startups kind of end up doing everything. And before long, I became the head of product at that startup. But what I found is I really enjoyed the product management and all the other things that I got involved in the startup. But my favorite part was, perhaps not surprisingly, the research, and really trying to understand the users and really becoming advocates for the users on our team. So when I decided it was time to move on from that startup, I ended up joining AnswerLab, where I was a researcher for about a year and a half before I moved into this role, where I now support our clients, as I mentioned before.
I'm actually just going to piggyback right on to Jason. So I started pretty similarly. I did cognitive psych and neuroscience as my undergrad as well, and really loved the way, you kind of plan and figure out like, why are people doing the things that they're doing. So I did a lot with like learning and memory. But I didn't see the results happening fast enough, and I realized that kind of in tech there was a lot more of this turnaround. Instead of writing a paper and like watching it go off into the, I don't know, who knows where it goes, and 3 people reading it without any results coming from it. Working with companies that really were taking your research findings and like weeks later or months later even were implementing what you were doing was super exciting to me. So that's kind of how I wiggled my way in as well. Kind of what brought me to the Bay Area too was I was doing some governmental contracts. So that was kind of my way in from, the academia side, like to go into tech a little bit there too. But I kind of toyed with the idea of, do I want to do design? Do I want to do research? Like, what's the benefit and downfall of doing one or the other for a while? So I was doing both design and research, and really decided that my strong suit and where I felt like I had the most power and skill was within research. So kind of stuck with that. Started with an agency in the Bay Area, was at Weight Watchers for a while, and now am at Algolia. So kind of a fun transition and pretty parallel to Jason, it sounds like.
So mine's going to be totally different. When I went to college, I initially thought I wanted to be a teacher. And then I came out and realized I really wanted to do corporate training. So I went back and got my MBA in human resources. While I was working on that degree, I was working for a temp agency who placed me at the amazing Usability Sciences. It's a user research usability agency, Marlin, out here in Dallas. And I started there as a temp receptionist and I wasn't as busy as I could have been. So I offered to help with some of the other things they were doing, specifically recruiting participants for user research studies. So I did that for about a year. And then someone realized I was really nosy and really liked to ask questions and talk to people, and said, hey, have you thought about being an analyst? Said, no, I don't know what they do. The opportunity came where I got to see my very first session as a support, and I could not believe how much people will tell you if you just give them a platform to talk. And then how we could take what they say, and I call myself translator, translate it back to the business as something that they can use and is actionable. So I did the agency thing for about 8 years. And then there's always this, perception that going in-house is better. So I ended up at Sabre, big technology company. It was like my first day of college. I usually sciences was probably less than 50 people. Sabre was now, 2,000 people on the campus. It was night and day. So I did that for a while. But then I got a call from AT&T. While I was at Sabre, I got to dabble in the framework of design thinking. So having, design studios, doing workshops, facilitating workshops, and they needed somebody on this team who could do research and facilitate. So I now do that here at AT&T. But it started as just happenstance back in the day.
That's so awesome. And thanks everybody for sharing this. And it's a coincidence that we have 3 neuroscientists in this panel. I don't know how that happened. Okay, so we got questions already. There is one here. Let me read. I'm most interested in hearing any recommendations our panelists have for what to do, actionable things, in order to learn and best prepare for your first user research job. So also, he or she says, I have always been very project focused when looking for a new job and developing new skills, but feel like I always realize after getting a job that there is so much more I could have done to learn. If only I had none. So what do you guys have to share about this? And not everybody has to say, but if everybody has an opinion about this, please share.
So I would say make sure you read. I think we read a lot. We are curious by nature. It's what makes us good at our jobs. So I would say definitely read and look for opportunities to, kind of share ideas and have discussions with other people. So it's one thing to read it. It's another thing to talk about it, and then something totally different to actually do it. But it's through those conversations you start to pick up what you understand and what you don't. Another thing that I've seen happening a lot more lately, and it's a great idea, is reach out to people like us on LinkedIn and say, hey, can I ask you some questions? Can I just talk to you? Can I buy you a coffee? Can I just come and see what you do and learn about the field, right? Chances are we'll tell you the good and the bad, and then just kind of our stories.
Yeah, I think to piggyback on that, like as a researcher, your job is to ask a lot of questions and kind of taking that similar approach to when you are exploring new jobs or exploring new opportunities, new companies to work for, really take that same approach and ask a lot of questions and explore and dig into that. I kind of treat it like a bit of a game to say like, well, how much can I learn about these people, this group, this company, this, etc. And it really is kind of fun to figure out, what are people willing to tell you? Where do they get a little bit shy? And like, how far can you push them? Yeah, and I think with that process of asking questions too, especially, it shows that you're interested. It shows that you're, already kind of doing your job in some sense. So kind of 2 feet on the ground, hit the ground running. Yeah.
Well, one thing I can add, maybe I'll add 2 things, sort of at a high level. If you're preparing to transition into this field, coming from either a different career or maybe you're still in school, I would say first thing to do is look at what experience you do have and think about how you can pitch it as being as relevant as possible to UX research. I see a lot of times, for example, people will share a resume with me, and I don't see any connection between what they've done and UX research, but then when I talk to them, we can find some links. So it could be that, for example, looking at my background, as I said, ran many sessions in my PhD work and prior to my PhD work in experimental psychology and neuroscience. Now, those weren't typically qualitative sessions, but there were qualitative components to at least some of them. So when I applied to my first exclusively UX research focused job here at AnswerLab, I made sure to really highlight that in my resume, in addition to the work I did subsequently in the startup space. And there's a lot of other ways I think that you could do that, but that's gonna be the first pass, right? When you're applying for a job, they're gonna see that resume, so they have to see some stuff that's relevant. And then the other thing I would say with this field is nobody's stopping you. If you want a career in UX research, just start doing some UX research. And you could do that for a friend who's got a startup, maybe you're involved with some sort of nonprofit or you know, synagogue or church group or something like that. You know, they probably have some digital presence, and even if not, they probably have some interest in users or customers, and you know, you could do something very light and pro bono for them possibly, or maybe they'll pay you a little something, and you know, then you could really develop. You could take something from beginning to end and show your ability to do that. You have the ability then when you get to the interview to speak about your client management skills. But you could also you could tackle something and try to create a bit of thought leadership, you know, tackle an interesting question in the field and maybe submit it to UXPA for, you know, as a poster or even a talk, or heck, just publish it on Medium. You know, so there's a lot you can do to start to build up your experience and build up that resume.
I would echo the same thing for UX design. In terms of reading a lot of books, I think there's a lot of blog articles you can read on Medium, but I personally found it really hard to weed out the ones that kind of repeat what everyone else was saying. So I always referred to books when I was starting off, and a good one to start off with is this book called A UX Team of One. It's a really good primer for UX design, especially if you're freelancing and you're like the only designer at a startup. It'll guide you through a lot of practices and like what you need to consider for research as well. I would say for design specifically, what helped me out a lot when I was starting off was consulting other products. So for example, I would frequently use Google Material Design to understand better, like what are the different UI components that are already out there that I don't need to reinvent the wheels. Because I see a lot of times designers, junior designers tend to want to create a new button or a new drop down, and most of the times it just doesn't work out that way. So I feel like there's plenty of resources out there, Google or Facebook, Airbnb, and if you go to their site, they have all these listed out, like how to use different dividers and sliders, tabs, cards, and they also walk you through like different states. So like what are the empty states, full states, error states, and I feel like that's really important when that's probably going to come in handy when you're starting your first project or your first couple projects.
And then we can't forget networking. So some of us have met previously, right, at a previous UXPA conference. I would imagine, you know, we're active in our local chapter. Get out and meet people. If you don't know, and as researchers, you know, we tend to be kind of introverted. Not necessarily me, people don't believe that, but you know, researchers, we tend to be kind of introverted. We want to keep to ourselves. But I push people, when you go to a networking event, if it's not something you're used to doing, push yourself to meet 3 people. And it shouldn't be, hey, I want a job. Can't start there. Mm-hmm. It has to be, I want to know you. I want to understand your journey. I just want to know people, because you never know when that relationship is going to be able to benefit you in the future. So get out and meet people.
Yeah, I totally agree. I remember having to have this, I have to practice this kind of mindset to go and network, because it was not something that was very easy for me. So yeah, I had, you know, oh, that's something that I need to learn. Then I have to practice until it becomes comfortable for me to go out there and network. So that's great advice, everybody. Okay, so we have actually one, you guys talked about, I don't know, teams of one, and there is somebody asking here if there were any issues or anything that you've seen when you've been the only designer or researcher in a company, right? So that could be like what you have heard from other people, or if you can share anything about your, you know, your experience. But you know, if there is anything you would share with us if we were, you know, trying to find our first job, and that is a job in a company where you're going to be the first and the only designer or researcher.
I think the big thing for me and kind of experience that I've had, so both as when I was working at an agency and contracting at other companies, but as well as now, is find the people who are advocates for you and what you're trying to get done. Regardless of where you are and who they are in the company, it might be someone in engineering, it might be someone in management, it might be a VP, you know, they could be all over the board, but try and pinpoint who those people are and leverage that. And that sounds kind of manipulative, but at the same time, you're trying to get your point across, right? You're trying to like sell what the user really needs at the end of the day. And so figuring out who you can get on your side to help communicate that properly is probably the most important thing. Because the real difference between like a UX team of one and a UX team of multiple is that you don't have this like persuasive power of multiple people, right? The ideas at the end of the day are going to be the same, whether you're one person or you're a whole team. But yeah, so figuring that out. And then I would say the other piece that I've found really valuable is finding people outside of the company who can kind of help you say like, hey, this is the best way to get that idea across. Or, other researchers, other UX people who are saying, yeah, like this is right, this is wrong, and kind of having someone to validate your work. One, to like raise your confidence in it, but also to make sure that what you are saying is the most effective way of trying to communicate whatever your findings are.
It also helps to keep you motivated, because sometimes when you're the only one, you kind of get beat up a little bit, right? So if you have a source of people, researchers, designers that you can reach out to just to kind of feel that charge, like, yeah, we are right, we just have more work to do, that just kind of helps keep you motivated and positive.
And I have a question
I would
here.
say,
Go ahead, Christine.
I would also say, I don't know if the question was more centered around, is it ideal to take, or is it not ideal to take the job if I'm the only person? Because I get that question asked pretty frequently. And I would say, like, starting off, I would view it as like, if you have an ideal situation in mind, like there's going to be steps that you have to take in order for you to get there. And at least for design, and I'm guessing also for research, is like the more you do it, or the more you practice it, and the more challenging the problem is, you're only going to get better. And the designers that I've connected with, that are the only designers, have been the ones that are so hungry for more, and they're the most active in their community, and they're the ones that know all these cool events that like I tag along, and they just have a wealth of knowledge because they just had to do it on their own. So I would say, like, it's really, I think everyone's path looks different, and to say one is better than the other is kind of looking at the picture not in depth, and there's a bigger advantage to it for being the only designer or researcher.
And then, it may not always be that way, right? So you get in there and you're the first one, you kill it, right? It's amazing. And now you've made a case to bring on other people. So it's really, like you said, it's a growing opportunity. As long as you keep a circle around you, you may not necessarily always be the only one.
Yeah, you might be the head of research, with a big team in a few years if you pick the right small company or startup. But I would say, just to add to the challenges, something to think about is that, well, you get to do a lot of different things. So that's great. I mean, for me, it was really great because I learned that I wanted to focus on UX research, which I hadn't even really understood was its own discipline. So you get that learning and that experience, a chance to try a bunch of things, but it also means you're pulled in a bunch of different directions, and likely you're not going to have the sort of resources that you would have at a large company. There, of course, could be exceptions if you're a really well-funded startup, or even a bigger company that is just starting UX research and is making a big commitment to it. But likely you won't have the resources, so you'll get really good at the scrappy stuff. And that can actually, there's a bunch of reasons I think that can actually lead to bad research practices, so it's something to be mindful of. And then make sure, as you have more opportunity to do research in a more formal, structured, and planned way, that you take advantage of that, so you can actually do better research over time.
You know what, that's a great point. So anyone who goes into that role has to be willing to stretch, right? Because a lot of it is going to be doing things that you're not necessarily comfortable with, right? If you're the only designer, then chances are you're probably going to have to learn research skills, right? And you're going to have to learn to talk to people in a different way. So it really requires you to stretch. So if you don't have that mindset, or that makes you uncomfortable, don't do it.
Yes, I agree. And we are getting a lot of questions about how you think about whether, a more formal graduate study or courses in HCI or design is beneficial to someone who wants to pursue UX research, for example. So, and we got this question, and Let me see. We got a couple of questions about this. So how do you feel that a formal kind of training can help you get your first job?
Yeah, I'll jump in and take this one. Well, I mean, we can see on this panel clearly there are many paths to this field. At least today, I don't know if it'll always be as open as it is today, but right now there's a lot of demand and there are a lot of folks coming in and from a lot of different directions. So it's totally the opposite of becoming like a medical doctor, right? Where there's just one way to do that. I think formal training is definitely one path. I mean, I think Christine, you said that you had done like a boot camp. Was that right? And I've seen a few people redirect their careers by doing like General Assembly course or something like that. There are other, I think there are still a limited number of formal options out there to focus on UX research, but there are some. Actually, I just joined the faculty of the Master's in Applied Psychology program at USC, and what I'm bringing is UX research. So starting in the spring, we'll actually have a course on UX research. It's a one-year program, so it's meant for people who really want to do something in applied psychology, but want to explore a few different options still, whether it's HR or market research or now UX research. So if you have a little time and funds, I think that would be a great way. And I've seen those graduates go on to top companies and top positions. But wherever you are, I think the goal is to figure out how to get your resume and into a place where it shows that you have some experience, and to prepare so you can do whatever exercises you're going to have to do as part of your interview process. Like I said, you can do those on your own if you want, but I think also a formal context will be a way to really accelerate that process for you.
Yeah, I think the big piece there is like the acceleration, like how fast do you want to get to where you're going, and a chunk of that too is like what type of learner are you. So I ended up doing my master's program even in human factors, so human computer interaction, which is basically user research, just in different names. But I wanted to do it partially just to network. I wanted to move from the governmental side like into more of the tech world. But also wanted to make sure that I was doing everything I could the right way and the best way possible and the most efficient way. And I realized that for me, the formal training was a way that I knew how to learn, that I knew kind of got me to where I needed to go, and kind of pushed me in that direction. Versus I know a lot of other people in the field really were like, hey, I just like threw myself in there and was able to do this at a company, like trial and error method. And those are just two different styles. So I think whatever works for you and whatever you feel like most comfortable with. Yes, the formal training did cost a little bit more, but in the end, within a year, I was, networking and finding lots of other companies and had that on my resume. The other piece I want to add is that there's certain companies that will look for different types of backgrounds. Like they will only hire you if you have, an undergrad or a master's in the right field, whether it says design or research or something about that in it. And a lot of that has to do with, like I said, big governmental companies will or agencies will only hire that because they're contracted to do so. And startups and smaller companies tend to be less likely to care about that formal background. And as Jason said, that might change over time, right? Right now, this is a very open field and people are very willing to say, hey, like you still have this training or you still have this knowledge and you're really good at what you do. That will overlook the fact that you might not even have a undergraduate degree, like you got your GED or whatever it is. That they're very flexible at this point in time. But I think going forward, right, the more that research grows into a bigger field or UX as a whole, that might change as well. But I've definitely seen companies that say you have to have a master's or you have to have an undergrad in a certain field, and that might be a harsh line for them for whatever reason. That kind of is the way it is. So take that into consideration too, wherever you decide to go with your training.
So for me, I'm always amazed at how my answer to this question has changed over time. So 12 years ago, I didn't have a degree in this, right? 12 years later, I'm looking back, and when I talk to kids now, because I'm a veteran, when I talk to kids now that have gone to school or live in an area like Dallas, they live in Seattle, they live in California, where there are schools who do this, it's going to be much harder to get a job without one of those degrees. It just is. On the flip side of that, I've been in positions where they hired someone who was extremely academic, but then they didn't necessarily adapt well, okay? So, and then you start seeing job postings and they're looking for someone who has more experience that doesn't necessarily have that academic degree. So I think a lot of it has to do with how close to one of these schools do you live, right? Sorry, if you're in a school, if you're in Dallas and SMU and UTD all have programs, then chances are your competition has that background, right? I would also look at, you know, like some of the other people were saying, you know, how well can you make your resume or whatever knowledge and experience you have line up to what that job rec is asking for. And that's going to take some creativity on your part, right? You can't send in the resume, to Jason's point, you can't send in the resume and expect whoever's looking at it to make that connection for you. Get with somebody, talk to somebody who helps with resumes, who can help you line up, this is what this would look like, and this is what I'm bringing to the table for this perspective, right? And not make them do the work.
Yeah, and I think just to piggyback on the last two comments, really, it depends a little bit on where you want to land, at least initially. If you want to land at one of the big Bay Area tech companies, well, you're probably going to need a master's, a PhD, or really great experience in the field. But you know, if you're interested and can make the connection to be at a startup or actually a more traditional company outside of the Bay Area or the big tech centers, you know, I think then there's going to be more flexibility.
And on the education piece too, there's a lot of them moving towards online. Like there's a lot more like willingness to do, you know, an online master's program, and a lot of schools are moving away from, okay, you have to be located in Dallas or San Francisco or wherever. That being said, those aren't always like as accredited or as like looked up upon or seen in the highlight. So to Jason's point too, like if you want to go into academia, like go hard, go into it, do what you got to do, but also look at what the school, like who they pump out, right? Who from that university or who from that program, what are they doing? Are they doing academic research? Are they in some of the big companies? Look at like, you know, where they end up and if that's a path that you want to go down as well.
Yeah, I should note actually at USC we have an on-site program. It's like 30 people a year, and an off-site program it's like 100 something at any given time, and they're exact same programs, and they're credited in the exact same ways.
Cool. There's so many good questions here. We talked a little bit about team of one, and I need to share this one question on the same topic because this is from Steve Krug. So he's here and he's asking if your first job is one where you are a team of one, you don't have anyone on the job to learn from. Do you think that's potentially a significant disadvantage? So he says that I always counted on learning from others as I went along.
Yeah, I think mentorship probably in any role is really key. And what's great is there's so many opportunities to get that mentorship outside of your company today. You know, through networking, meetups, you can meet so many people. Here in LA, we actually have our UXPA chapter has a formal mentorship program, so that'd be something to look into. And then, you know, through LinkedIn, you can reach out to people all around the country, the world, I'm sure, and find some of that support.
And then I think to Christine's point earlier, you don't necessarily stay a team of one, right? You're a team of one with a bunch of advocates. So you get out and you meet people in the company who know more than you do, okay? And what you're looking to do is create cheerleaders. So, you know, when we started the big UX program at Faber, that was one of the first things we did. Get out and meet people. Tell them what we do. So then a lot of the work that came down the pipe was not necessarily work I had to go get. It was somebody that I met who was into the work that we were doing and recommended it to somebody else. So don't stay a team of one. Become a person of one with a whole bunch of advocates. And learn the company culture. Learn the company culture and the hierarchy. All those structures matter because that's what you'll need to be able to continue to grow.
Do you guys have any experience developing mentorship programs in the companies where you work? I mean, regardless of the number of, the size of the team that you have, but have you ever helped creating like a more formal kind of mentorship program?
So I'll jump in here because I haven't really shared from the design. I feel like it's a little different for design in terms of mentorship, or not mentorship, but like kind of going back to the previous question of the formal training or education. So I got a lot of my advocates from my boot camp, and that's something that I knew going into boot camp that I was going to get out of. And there are multiple ways that you can kind of break into design, especially if you already like sketch or draw. I feel like you already have work and you already know, you kind of come into the industry with, experience in like the creatives. But what's good about boot camp is that you're kind of like in this zone, or like, you're in the same page together. And so you can rant about your work, like your first job, and like what's working and what's not working, and kind of figure out things together. And so that way I wouldn't necessarily call that mentorship, but in a way that provided more value for me than actually having like a formal mentorship program at work. And I feel like mentors can mean very different things. Like I have several different mentors who have different strengths. So one person I would go for portfolio reviews, and then another person, she's really good at talking to other designers and learning more about different industries and like the culture of different companies. And so they really vary. And like I used to think there was like this one, god of mentor who I would consult and that I would always, ping. But it was actually not the case. And I just consider them as like peers and friends. And I feel that I gain the most out of it when it's like just natural. And some people I would connect on LinkedIn and they have this like really great background. And I would get on a call and like for some reason it just like didn't hit off. And I feel like that's fine. And it's important to find mentors that you are actually comfortable with, because that's the environment where you learn the most, and that you can ask, vulnerable questions if you are struggling to grow in your company, or you're having some friction with your coworkers, or you seem to have difficulty advocating for design in your company because you're a UX team of one. I feel like those key people will come into place more organically than like being nervous about not having a mentor. I feel like it didn't help me when I was starting off.
Yeah, it's super important to be able to communicate with whoever you look up to. Whether you find them on LinkedIn or you like run into them in the street or the bus or wherever, having that connection and being able to communicate effectively is so much more important than having like, the number one UX expert in the world. I think that person is going to be your friend, be on your side, and really support you and what you're trying to get at so much more than you can ever imagine. Yeah, finding the right person is really, really important.
And when you say finding the right person, one of the things that, is dear to my heart is finding someone who loves you enough, cares about you as a person enough to tell you when you're wrong, and to kind of help you course correct. When you're looking for a mentor, it's not just somebody who's like, oh, let me tell you everything about me. It should be exactly to Marlin and Christine's point. It should be a back and forth conversation, and it should be an opportunity to kind of guide you. So then going back to Christine's point, it's not just one mentor. It's the mentor circle. Find out what they're good at. So I have a mentor at AT&T. I have several UX mentors. I have some design-focused mentors. I have personalized mentors. There's a circle. It's not just one person.
I have a question here about whether it's ever possible, if you know of UX researchers and designers working from home remotely.
Well, I can speak to that a little bit. Definitely a lot of the companies I work with, that is not permitted except for certain days a week, or in a limited fashion, but they mostly are not hiring people to work remotely. I've seen a few exceptions where somebody ended up moving after they had been there, but even that I think is quite rare. But there are other companies that take a different approach, and actually at AnswerLab we've really evolved on that question. So some years ago, I think what really happened is the Bay Area evolved, which is where one of our 2 offices is and where we were started. And some years ago, it just started to become harder and harder for people to make it to the office every day. People were getting pushed further and further out. So company, we had a very traditional culture at that time of being in the office every day, but started to allow people to work from home a little more often, so they wouldn't have those terrible commutes. And then some people started to say, I can't afford to live here anymore. So people started to move elsewhere, but they were really good. So we kept them on. And for us, a lot of our work does involve travel to different client sites, or we do a lot of remote interviews as well. And so that ended up working pretty well. And at some point we realized what we care about is the talent. So our approach now is we'll hire the best person wherever they are. And I would say probably 40 to 50% of our team is located outside of our 2 offices in New York and San Francisco. I'm actually based in LA, and we have people all over the country. It works really well because we have clients all over the country, so they can be close to our clients. And I think in a lot of those areas, there aren't as many opportunities in UX research. So it's a real win-win to have a great researcher living where they want to live, and then getting to work with top companies in the world.
I would say that it's not uncommon, but the majority of researchers' work probably go into the office. But it's not uncommon. I know several, but then to Jason's point, then they typically have to travel more. So in a lot of cases, that's your trade-off. So you can work from home the majority of the time, but be ready to be an airplane warrior if the job calls for it, and usually it does. Even if it's not necessarily always do the interview, sometimes it's planning, workshops, and other things you have to be there in person for.
Yeah, I think the position lends itself a lot of times to interfacing with many different parts of a company. It's not generally that you interface with just one person or you work with like a singular engineer or a singular, stakeholder. So because of the nature of the work itself, a lot of times you are there and you're trying to, figure out how do you get all these people in a room together, and how do you get everyone to communicate, or how do you, communicate your point or whatever you're trying to make to everyone else, that there is value to having shared space and being in the same community. That being said, like a lot of the research itself is remote. Like we do video interviews, you go to client sites, you go to wherever else you need to go. That if you're traveling part of the time too, a lot of companies are like, well, cool. I mean, you're here when you need to be and you're there when you need to be there. So there is definitely flexibility. And I've seen people, work in different countries or in different time zones for a company in the US, for a company overseas. Like there's definitely a little bit of everything. So that there are options, but just know that ultimately you're trying to, again, teach everyone else about the user, that the best way you can do that is generally in person or to be able to communicate with everyone else.
So to that point, so I have the option of working from home, but I rarely do because I find a lot of value in when I'm trying to get participant lists, when I'm trying to make a point. Sometimes that's just easier face-to-face than, telepresence or, web conference of some sort. Sometimes, especially when you're building a program, you want to be seen. That's just part of it.
That's the advocate side of being a researcher that's so important.
Yeah, and there were questions about that too, so I'm glad you guys brought that up. And yeah, that's lots of what we do have to do with connecting with people and personal kind of relationships, even with your team and coworkers. So I guess working remotely, all that is possible too is about learning how people communicate better when they are remote, right? Is that email, is that Slack, what is the best communication for each person and teams, right? So that's an important factor too. There's a question, and we have just 10 minutes to end this, and we have lots of questions. So what I'm gonna do is to get all these questions and share on the YouTube link for, so can we know better. Maybe we have another session like this again, so we can continue talking. But I think we have the time for a couple more questions. And one of them here is, do you have formal or informal internship programs? And do you think that's a good way? Internships are a good way, a good pathway to a career in UX design or research?
Yeah, I think internships are great to kind of feel out a company as well, because you're low commitment. If you don't end up liking the projects or the culture, it's an easy way out. And you can also learn a lot in an internship. I think with any kind of internship or a boot camp or any other opportunity, is really what you make of the opportunity. And it's not going to be given to you necessarily. So at Instacart, we don't have a formal internship, but we do allow interns to work if they're the ones reaching out and they come with us with an agenda of, hey, I would like an internship, and these are areas that I want to work in. Like, do you have any opportunities? That's actually how I got most of my internships in college too. They were all unpaid, but when I was transitioning from chemistry into retail marketing at that time, I just wanted any experience. So for me, that experience was more valuable than the pay. And I feel like when you're early on in your career, I tend to have this mindset of, I'm going to take that job that's not necessarily the highest pay, but that will allow me to grow and allow me to stretch more than these other opportunities. And so I would kind of view internships the same way, because really it's a learning opportunity.
Yeah, I think a big thing that I've seen too is not necessarily calling it an internship. So for example, in California, you can't have an unpaid internship. And so what I've kind of pushed for, and a lot of people have found success in too, is shadowing someone. There's nothing wrong with saying, hey, can I like shadow you for a day? Can I like help you take some notes during this research session just to see how other companies do it? And I still do that today. I'll meet someone that says, oh, I do research at X, Y, and Z company. And I'm like, well, that's cool. Can I like come shadow you for a day? And honestly, like 8 out of 10 times they're like, yeah, sure, cool. You know, another person in the room or someone to take notes, someone to be there is usually a positive for them. I would say most research teams are still kind of understaffed, honestly. But as Christine was saying, it's a great way to get into or get some insight into how that company works, like how they conduct research. Is that a culture I want to be a part of? You're really like submersing yourself in there. And yeah, you'd be surprised at how many are really, really willing to be like, absolutely, come shadow us, come visit, come, do what you got to do.
So a lot of big companies, so AT&T has a huge internship program. My team specifically didn't get any this year. We're working on some other things right now. But in addition to a traditional internship program, Sabre had one, AT&T has one, a lot of other companies I'm aware of have one, where it's like this post-collegiate kind of a flex force type of program. So you may not necessarily end up in UX, but let's say you decide this isn't for you, but you get into those flex force or post-collegiate programs, and then you get into these big companies and you get to kind of cycle through different parts of the company. So then you're not necessarily married to any one thing. You do like 18 months to 2 years, and then at that point you're like, I still want to do UX. You're already in the company, right? So now just go find you a hookup. But in addition to internships, make sure you look at those programs. If you're going to do an internship, realize those are highly competitive. They're starting that work 6 to 8 months easily before the summer starts. So if you're going to do it, identify those and get busy as soon as you can. Especially paid internships.
Well, speaking of highly competitive internships and formal internships, I would mention for any academics who might be watching that Facebook has one that I've seen people have a lot of success with. I would argue that Facebook is the most user-centric large company on the planet right now. So I think a great opportunity for training there. And I think the program is open to people who are getting their PhD but haven't completed it. That may not be the only kind of person who would be eligible, but I would definitely look into that if that might fit you.
Cool. And so yeah, so I mean, I guess as a final question here, I wanted to ask you if there is anything that you and if you can share that you would have done differently if you had the chance to go back, and knowing what you know now? Is there anything that you say, you know, I wish I have done X, Y, and Z differently, or that I had done it all, so that my path would be like different or easier? Is that anything?
That's really hard to say because I wouldn't have been here without like some of the mistakes that I've made, and some of the random people that I've encountered because I've, you know, either I screwed up or, you know, went down the wrong path in the first place. Like I said, I started thinking like that I wanted to get more into design than into research, and that's what, you know, took me to where I am today. So I can't say that exploring is the wrong answer. What I will recommend to anyone, and I think I didn't start it early enough, is just to ask a lot of questions. Whether they sound stupid or silly, just ask away, and no one's gonna like judge you for what you are asking or what you're exploring. Whether that's in your company, whether that's outside the company, whether that's on a webinar like right now, no question is stupid, because it means that someone else probably has the same question as you out there. Yeah, that's probably my biggest suggestion, that when I first started my career, I wasn't like raising my hand enough to be like, why are we doing this? Like, what was the reasoning behind, you know, this method that the company uses? And yeah, helps to know context.
I would say that UX research, at least, is still very much a location-based career. So I would think about that. And you know, I had other constraints that limited where I could be, but definitely, you know, if you can, you know, go to the Bay Area. If you, that's certainly the best place to get into UX research, or, you know, a big place like New York, or you know, maybe Seattle or something.
So I think for me, you know, when you get started and you feel like you should know everything, you feel like you should go to meetings and you just know everything. And I remember there were times where people, you know, we get acronym centric and everything's an acronym, and you just start to, oh yeah, I know what that is, and you have no idea what that is, right? And now you don't feel comfortable asking. Now in a meeting, I get to say, I'm research. What does that mean? What does that acronym mean? Asking questions, not trying to come off as the know-it-all in the room. I don't know. I'm a researcher, and that's why I'm here. So getting comfortable with some things you don't know. Now, if it's something that you could probably look up on Google real quick, then do that. But if you still don't know, please say so, right? You're more effective if you show that, one, I'm trying to learn from you, right? And it's not a battle of the minds, and it's not the battle of the wits. I'm really trying to understand. So if you don't get something, ask questions. If you don't feel comfortable asking in the bigger group, go back to one of those people, those advocates that we keep talking about, somebody on your team, and say, hey, can you fill me in on what just happened? But don't leave that thing or that meeting just not knowing, just because you want to be prideful.
Yeah, I would say there were a lot of times I just was so afraid to take that step forward. And so I would overthink things, whether it be speaking in a meeting or signing up to present at my company, or things, you know, that made me afraid as a designer. And so I would say that, you know, throw out perfection as fast as you can, and just, yeah, I wish I had more of that growth mindset of, you know, it's not about whether I failed at this or not, but it's always like whatever I do, it's, I'm learning. And I think having that mentality has, you know, helped me grow a lot.
Thank you so much, everybody. This was awesome. And I know that, you know, we have tons of questions still, and I'm going to try to collect and get back to you all who had questions. Please share this video. I'm going to share the link soon with everyone, and please feel free to share the video with anybody who's looking for, you know, similar answers. And Jason, Marlin, Christine, and Adrienne, thanks so much. It was awesome to have you here today.
Thank you.
Thanks for putting this together, Jonathan, as well.
Yeah, thanks for having all of us.